The supreme, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rare to encounter in millions of eons. Now that I see, hear, and uphold it, I vow to realize the Tathagata's true meaning. To liberate all sentient beings, please give rise to the supreme bodhicitta. We shall continue our study of Entering the Middle Way, composed by Chandrakirti. I have previously shared some details about Chandrakirti's life. In a recently translated biography of Khenpo Achung, there are also mentions of Chandrakirti. I recall that at the time Khenpo Achung had perhaps not yet been ordained. When he was a young boy staying at home, a family once invited some monks to chant the Heart Sutra and the Tara prayer. Khenpo Achung was helping them serve tea. While he was pouring the tea, he accidentally spilled some on an elderly monk's hand. The elderly monk immediately scolded him. "Don't you have eyes? Why aren't they open?" Khenpo Achung replied to him, "Haven't you been reciting the Heart Sutra all day? It says there are no eyes, ears, nose, tongue, or body. Since you said there are no eyes, how could I have opened them?" The monk was left speechless regarding the absence of eyes. Khenpo Achung maintained there were no eyes, while the monk insisted there were. But when asked to provide a scriptural basis for it, the monk could not produce one. Likewise, Khenpo Achung could not yet explain the reasoning behind no eyes. Later, he kept this matter close to his heart, feeling a sense of anxiety. He pondered this question constantly. One day, while he was out herding, he saw many retreat huts at a mountain pass. There were many monastics living in those huts. He approached one of the bhikshus and drew near to him. Khenpo Achung asked, "Who are you?" He replied, "I am Chandrakirti." At the time, he likely didn't know who Chandrakirti was, as it was before he had begun his formal studies. He then said, "A while ago, I encountered an elderly monk. He said there are eyes and ears, but I said there are not. However, neither of us could convince the other." He asked, "How is it that they do not exist?" Chandrakirti said, "You are still young, and your wisdom has not yet matured. You will understand as you grow older." He then bestowed a blessing upon him. As he was leaving, he gave him a book, identifying it as the auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way, along with an old worn Pandita hat. He brought them back with great joy. According to the local customs of the time, parents generally did not allow children to bring old, discarded items into the house. It was thought to bring misfortune, so it was forbidden. Thus he did not dare take them home. Instead, he placed them on a rock near the tent. That was where the hat and book were left. When he returned, his family asked, "You've been gone for so long, what exactly happened?" He explained that at a nearby monastery he had received something from a pandita. Hearing this, they didn't take him seriously at all. They kept teasing him. The next morning his uncle said, "If you really did find them, go and fetch the book and the hat." When he went to get them, there was nothing on the rock. By then they had already vanished. So in essence, what had he received? A special blessing from Chandrakirti Bodhisattva. From that point onward, in his study of the Middle Way, he became exceptionally proficient in every aspect. For I have previously read his commentary on the 400 stanzas on the Middle Way. It is truly excellent, which leads me to think, as I mentioned in the last session, I hope you will keep a photo of Chandrakirti Bodhisattva and offer your own prayers to him. If we have the karmic connection by relying on the blessings of Chandrakirti and the blessings of Entering the Middle Way in a very short period of time, we will realize the meaning of Prajna Paramita and emptiness. This is indeed of great importance. Today we continue with the first Bhumi Bodhisattva. Entering the Middle Way covers the 10 Bhumis and the stage of no more learning. We are on the first Bhumis, the supreme joy. Within this Bhumi, the Paramita of generosity is discussed. The third section addresses the classifications of generosity. Generosity devoid of the gift receiver and giver is called a supramundane perfection, but when attachment for these three arises, it is then said to be a mundane perfection. Here we discuss the classifications of generosity, which is divided into mundane paramita of generosity and supramundane paramita of generosity. divided into these two aspects. First, regarding the supramundane paramita of generosity, what exactly does it entail? If a bodhisattva can thoroughly realize the emptiness of the three spheres, a concept we frequently discuss in our teachings, for a first Bhumi bodhisattva or any other bodhisattva within the state of meditative equipoise, there is no concept of three spheres or even four spheres. Nothing exists, and such notions do not arise. One is completely beyond all conceptual elaborations. However, during the state of post-meditation, one is not abiding in the emptiness of the three spheres. So what does the emptiness of the three spheres mean? Essentially, these three spheres refer to three factors. For instance, if I were to practice the generosity of giving my body, the giver, which is I, is unfindable and empty. The recipient of the gift, such as a beggar in need, is also empty in nature. The body being given is likewise empty. If a bodhisattva, through the course of training, fully realizes that these three factors are empty, unfindable, and like the open sky, understanding this truth is called the emptiness of the three spheres. Conversely, when ordinary people practice generosity, they think I am giving to a certain person on a certain day, giving my own physical body, and in such and such a manner. There is constant attachment and reference to these three factors. But for a bodhisattva in the state of post-meditation, this is not the case. This is what we call the three-sphere empty supramundane paramita of generosity. If one gives rise to attachment toward these three factors, the giver, the recipient, and the object given, if grasping arises toward these three, then this generosity is called a mundane paramita of generosity. Now, this issue is discussed at quite some length within the commentaries. Due to our limited time, there is no need for an extensive elaboration here. The main point here is to define paramita, what constitutes a true paramita. This involves linking the original Sanskrit term paramita with our Chinese translation bolo mi duo. When combined, prajna paramita essentially acts as a mantra. When a mantra is translated into Tibetan or Chinese, the way the terms are joined follows different rules of grammar and linguistics. According to these linguistic rules, it is sometimes translated as reaching the other shore. Truly reaching the other shore is what paramita means. This shore is samsara, while the other shore is Buddhahood. When one truly reaches the stage of no more learning, that is called paramita. At other times, the entire set of 6 paramitas, from generosity all the way to the 10 paramitas, can all be referred to as paramitas. So, an analysis is required here. Perhaps you should first understand the reason for this analysis. Generosity with these 3 spheres is a mundane paramita, while without them it is a supramundane paramita. Some scholars believe that in reality the generosity discussed here, if practiced before attaining the bhumis, is called mundane paramita. Generosity practiced after attaining the bhumis is then called supramundane paramita. That is one perspective. However, many masters of our own tradition believe that the distinction made here is entirely within the realization of a first Bhumi bodhisattva. Both mundane and supramundane paramitas are distinguished within the level of a first Bhumi bodhisattva. Why? Because as a bodhisattva of the first Bhumi or above, most of the time is spent in a state essentially identical to meditative equipoise. Thus, such a bodhisattva has no true attachment. Attachment to the 3 spheres is absent. Yet for certain dull-witted bodhisattvas unskillful in means, it may occur occasionally, rather than being a constant state. Unlike ordinary people practicing generosity, who may have a continuous stream of attachment to the 3 spheres, for a bodhisattva who has attained the bhumis, it only arises very rarely in their continuum. Some say it might only happen once over many eons or after hundreds of years, when a thought occurs, I gave him this gift. The 3 spheres briefly exist in their continuum. At that specific level of existence, it is referred to as the mundane paramita of generosity. This is primarily the reasoning regarding the paramitas. I haven't had much time to look into it recently, but there are several different aspects to prajna paramita. For instance, with prajna paramita, its path can be called paramita, and its result can also be called paramita. What is the result? The result is the perfect state of Buddhahood. As for the path, from the first Bhumi to the 10th Bhumi, we can refer to it as the path. This too can be called prajna paramita. For example, in some commentaries on entering the middle way by Jetsongkhapa or the Karmapa, it is said that from the first Bhumi to the 10th Bhumi, whether it is generosity, ethical discipline, or patience, all of these can be called prajna paramita. Because they are embraced by dedication and skillful means, they can be prajna paramita. However, there is a slight difference between this and the prajna paramita of the Buddha stage. There is a distinction between the result paramita and the path paramita. Nevertheless, the path paramita can also be termed paramita. That is one point. Another point concerns the attachment to the three spheres. Some masters believe that, well, there are three different viewpoints. Regarding this attachment to the three spheres, some say it is a clinging to inherent existence, the grasping at things as real. Some consider it a clinging to characteristics, and others call it the clinging to dualistic perception. There are these three explanations. Among these, certain great masters believe the attachment to the three spheres is a clinging to inherent existence. This is mainly found in Jetsongkhapa's commentary, because they maintain that clinging to inherent existence coexists with afflictive obscurations. In that case, below the 7th Bhumi, before reaching the 7th Bhumi, there are afflictive obscurations. Therefore, this attachment to the three spheres is a clinging to inherent existence. This is the view that attachment to the three spheres is a clinging to inherent existence. However, this perspective was refuted by Gorampa in his commentary. In his refutation, he states that generally, once the first Bhumi is attained, there should be no clinging to inherent existence. For at the level of the first Bhumi, all factors related to view of the transitory collection have already been completely abandoned. There shouldn't be any clinging to true existence. There won't be, nor should there be, any such clinging. Furthermore, the attachment to the three spheres during this process should be a clinging to characteristics. What does clinging to characteristics mean? For instance, take a magician who conjures up a woman. Although he does not believe she is inherently existent, since he conjured her himself, she cannot be real. Even if she is not real, he might still perceive her external form and experience some attachment. It is a dreamlike, illusion-like attachment. Thus, bodhisattvas of the Bhumis have this clinging to characteristics. It exists particularly in the impure 7 Bhumis. While ordinary people have clinging to inherent existence, those from the 1st to the 7th Bhumis have clinging to characteristics. The 3 pure Bhumis have a subtle clinging to dualistic perception. In fact, this subtle dualistic clinging is not obvious. The relevant commentaries on the ornament of clear realization also discuss this. Such points are also held within our own tradition. At the time, Nogopa Rinpoche Henpo Tepa also cited Nogopa Rinpoche's view. Our tradition also accepts that clinging to inherent existence is absent. However, whether on an impure Bhumi or regarding the attachment to the three spheres, there remains a kind of clinging to characteristics. If it is considered clinging to characteristics or dualistic appearance, there is nothing illogical about it. So regarding these principles, what should you think? Perhaps sometimes, without a solid grounding in the middle way, studying it might actually trigger various discursive thoughts. One moment these great masters state this view, and the next they state that view. Does it seem entirely contradictory? In reality, it is not. If we can master it ourselves, we'll see many subtle points within. The different explanations are quite fascinating. If we don't fully grasp them, it's fine, we can just listen. In general, what was just called mundane paramita is actually characterized by attachment to the three spheres, whether it be a clinging to characteristics or otherwise. However, a clinging to inherent existence after the first Bhumi is indeed unlikely, because it's impossible for those from the 1st to 10th Bhumis to perceive phenomena as completely real, as ordinary people do. Since a first Bhumi Bodhisattva has completely abandoned clinging to I and mine. If clinging to I and mine is gone, such attachment is essentially non-existent. When we studied the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, it also stated that before the 8th Bhumi, there is afflicted consciousness. Afflicted consciousness can function as a clinging to characteristics. After the 8th Bhumi, such effortful clinging naturally ceases to exist. This point has been explained by many, such as the masters Haribhadra of India. Therefore, regarding these principles, perhaps we don't need to analyze them too deeply. However, a bit of basic knowledge is necessary, because sometimes we wonder whether the emptiness of the three spheres exists within the continuum of an Arya or that of an ordinary being. As ordinary beings, we can visualize a similar kind of emptiness without reference to these three factors. But true emptiness of the three spheres, including in dedication, is only possible after attaining the first Bhumi. As we often say, true non-referential dedication and non-referential great compassion are possible after the first Bhumi. Currently, at the level of ordinary beings, we are merely visualizing a similar state. Therefore, when we dedicate merit, we often think, this is how Manjushri dedicated, this is how Avalokiteshvara dedicated, this is how Samantabhadra dedicated. I dedicate just as they did. This is no different from dedicating with the emptiness of the three spheres. Otherwise, at the level of ordinary beings, achieving complete emptiness of the three spheres remains somewhat difficult. Thus, when speaking of the first Bhumi Bodhisattva, mundane paramita of generosity and supramundane paramita of generosity should be established in this way. Analysis can be carried out in this manner. Specific detailed analyses are clearly provided in the auto-commentary on Entering the Middle Way and other commentaries. You should be able to understand them. Overall, whether we are listening to or teaching the Dharma, we should first give rise to bodhicitta, then teach or listen with single-minded focus, and finally dedicate the merit. This is crucial. Currently, for many people, opportunities for group study like those we had in the past will be unavailable for a period of time. But because the opportunity isn't there, should we give up our studies? I don't believe we should. Everyone should find their own convenient methods and not let them be interrupted. One's studies must not be interrupted. Moreover, if we persist, opportunities will arise in the future. As I've said recently, everything shall pass. Many things will indeed pass. Thus, during these unusual times, one should try their best not to interrupt their studies. Once studies are interrupted, our views and conduct can undergo many changes, especially for some of you whose foundations aren't very stable. Without such study and continuous effort, you might slowly end up exactly like those people in the world who have never heard or reflected on the Dharma. So we should still cherish every day, learn at least some Dharma, and do not let this be interrupted. Third, a summary by explaining the qualities.
Ramne Shantambi Tela, Gochomzi by Napkirpo, Gavanda Nora Chishir Jivjan, the Mambatubo Tamjan number of Sane,
abiding perfectly in the Bodhisattva's mind, and endowed with light beautifying the sublime ones. The first Bhumi, supreme joy, is the water crystal moon, which dispels all darkness and reigns victorious. This is the final summary. The wisdom and great compassion of the first Bhumi, the supreme joy, is completely in union without separation or joining. This is equivalent to a water crystal moon. This is explained through a metaphor, like a water crystal moon. So this wisdom of supreme joy, the full moon that combines the wisdom of selflessness and non-referential great compassion, abides in the non-conceptual sky of the mind of the first Bhumi Bodhisattva. In fact, the first Bhumi, supreme joy, and the sky of his mind are actually one entity. There are no two separate things. However, when we describe it, it is as if the lunar disk of the supreme joy's qualities abides in the sky of space within a bodhisattva's non-conceptual mind. Then, regarding the light of its support, as mentioned in the commentaries by the Karmapas and others, the support for the generation of conventional bodhicitta contains the light of selflessness within that dependence. There is also an explanation that it attains splendor within appearance, but generally speaking, we can say this: the wisdom of selflessness of the first Bhumi, which is the support, is light that is extremely magnificent. So this wisdom, that is to say, the radiance of the lunar disk, dispels layers upon layers of darkness. After all obscurations to be abandoned by seeing are fully eliminated, one gradually eliminates obscurations to be abandoned by meditation, and then sequentially attains the state of a Tathagata, the supreme victorious state of a Tathagata. This means using metaphors to praise the qualities of the first Bhumi Bodhisattva. After reaching the first Bhumi, the obscurations to be abandoned by seeing are eliminated, the three types of abandonments by seeing we discussed earlier, and then the stages of learning and no more learning are attained. It was also mentioned in the Jewel Cloud Sutra that a bodhisattva is compared to the moon. Why? It seems there are 10 qualities or something like that. For example, the moon brings happiness to sentient beings. The first Bhumi, supreme joy, also brings happiness. When everyone sees the moon, they are delighted. The first Bhumi Bodhisattva is the same. Then he increases white Dharma's virtuous qualities. The moon also increases white radiance. Also, the moon dispels darkness. He also dispels the darkness in the hearts of sentient beings, and so on. Metaphors are made using 10 such qualities, so here it mainly speaks of this kind of wisdom of the first Bhumi Bodhisattva. It can actually eliminate the ordinary person's state and eliminate things like the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. All these dense layers of darkness are completely eliminated, gradually attaining the qualities of the path of meditation and the path of no more learning. This concludes the first chapter, which is the ultimate bodhicitta. Summary of this chapter. The explanation of the first chapter of entering the middle way is now complete. Next we will discuss the second Bhumi, the stainless one. The explanation of the stainless is divided into the actual explanation and the summary of this chapter. Two aspects. The actual explanation is divided into the basis of differentiation, the definition of the Bhumi, the superior distinction of this second Bhumi, and the summary by explaining the qualities of the Bhumi. Three aspects. First is the definition of the Bhumi, or the distinction of the stainless ground.
대스를 분수 연단 딱단 시를 문음 대한 차점 점을 방 링의 지 여았다가 제르 담빌람을 내름 지치를 소브르 시드.
He is endowed with perfect morality and purity. Even in dreams he shuns the stain of immorality, since all movements of his body, speech and mind are pure. He accumulates the excellent virtue of all 10 courses of action. The literal meaning here is quite simple. When a bodhisattva reaches the second Bhumi, his ethical discipline is very perfect. Moreover, it becomes pure naturally, because upon reaching the second Bhumi, all of his discipline become purified. In what way are they pure? Whether they are prescribed offenses or natural offenses, all sinful actions are fundamentally not committed during the day. Even in dreams he will not break his vows. There will be no stained mind. Some commentaries state that throughout the entire day, generally when one reaches the second Bhumi, his discipline are very, very pure. Therefore he will not transgress even in dreams. In the past, His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche often mentioned that because his teacher Khenpo Thubga personally maintained exceptionally pure discipline, his circle of disciples also maintained very pure discipline. Throughout his life, His Holiness believed that his teacher must be a bodhisattva of the second Bhumi, a bodhisattva who had attained the second ground. But when Khenpo Thubga finally manifested, passing into nirvana, His Holiness realized that he had made a mistake in previously labeling him a second Bhumi Bodhisattva. His teacher wasn't at that level, he must have attained the level of Buddhahood. This should be recorded in His Holiness's biography. While his teacher was alive, His Holiness always felt his teacher was a second Bhumi Bodhisattva, but it was only upon his passing that he discovered he must be even beyond that, someone who reached the stage of no more learning. So within our world, such great bodhisattvas do indeed exist, including His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche. Indeed, no matter from which aspect you look, his discipline is pure and his circle of disciples is pure. In many ways, he is at least at the second Bhumi or above. For disciples with faith, this is certainly the case. For those without faith, they might even have all sorts of judgmental thoughts about the Buddha, so there is no helping that. Now, regarding such a bodhisattva's body, speech and mind, the body will not commit killing, stealing or sexual misconduct. Then for speech, lying, including divisive, harsh and idle speech, are all abandoned. And what about the mind? Covetousness, ill will and wrong views. All activities of body, speech and mind become completely pure. This is called the 10 virtuous paths of action. These paths mean not only refraining from negative karma, but also, for instance, regarding not killing. Not only does he refrain from killing, but he also practices life release. Not only does he refrain from stealing, but he also makes offerings and so on. So in the continuum of this bodhisattva, all 10 paths of virtuous action are gathered. This able to gather actually means all virtuous dharmas can be accumulated or compiled. Now, if we look at the word for discipline in Sanskrit, it is shila. This term implies the perfection of merit and the total purity of one's continuum. It also carries the meaning of bringing coolness, among many other nuances. So this is the essential meaning of ethical discipline. Now, when it comes to these disciplines, the Vaibhashika school, the Hinayana Vaibhashikas, recognize 7 types of vows, or the 7 precepts. These cover our physical and verbal actions, targeting a total of 7 unvirtuous karmas. By refraining from these 7, they establish what they call the 7 precepts. And then there are the 4 root vows. They view these as form dharmas, as having a real entity. For instance, when a monk possesses these vows, every single precept within his continuum exists as a real dharma. Not killing has its own substantial dharma, or you could say a concrete entity, and not stealing likewise exists in his continuum as a manifest real dharma. That's their perspective. But in the Mahayana, as Shantideva said, the attainment of the mind of renouncing evil is called the perfection of discipline. It's about attaining that resolve to refrain. For example, when I take the vow of patience or the vow not to kill, deciding I will never kill again, that mind of renouncing the act is where the perfection of discipline lies. I simply make a vow not to commit that evil, and that itself is discipline. So the Mahayana defines discipline primarily through this mind of renunciation, whereas the Hinayana sees it as a real entity that one acquires within their own continuum. Regardless of the definition on this ground, one doesn't create karma even in dreams, and the 10 paths of virtuous action are completely purified. That is what defines a second Bhumi Bodhisattva. We'll be breaking down these 10 virtuous paths shortly. Actually, even ordinary people are taught about these 10 paths, but by the second Bhumi, they become far more purified. That's the main point here. Next, we'll discuss the specific distinctions of this ground, divided into the explanation of how the perfection of discipline becomes supreme and pure, praise for ethical discipline, and the classifications of the perfection of discipline. These 3 aspects. The first is further divided into the actual explanation and the reasoning behind this purity of discipline. 2 parts. Starting with the actual explanation.
Givi lamdar tajik chichir yang tela lagde shinda tabar yer stongir dartar taqdar nam taqte wachak chakbar jugut chakbar tetak kirnam zi.
Not only this path of virtue, but in all 10 deeds he becomes most excellent and pure. Just as the radiant autumn moon lights up the night sky, morality fills him with peace and radiance. When studying entering the middle way, you might find it a bit easier to grasp than the ornament of clear realization. It's also slightly more accessible than Buddhist logic pramana. Still, compared to other subjects, it can be a little difficult to understand. Especially for those without a foundation in Buddhism, it might be somewhat difficult to follow. But regardless, with entering the middle way, I hope everyone learns to explain the literal text and masters its outlines and commentaries. It's not just about recalling it. When you look at the book, you need to understand the full terminology, the phrasing, and the underlying meaning. This is very important. Now, here we are mainly discussing the perfection of discipline. What is this perfection like? As we mentioned above regarding the 10 virtuous paths, the 10 paths starting with not killing and so on this second Bhumi, the stainless, they become even more enhanced, more supreme, and most pure. As we said earlier, there isn't even a trace of transgression in dreams. So at this stage, the purity is exceptional. I believe the Kushtagarbha 10 Wheels Mahayana Sutra also mentions this. If one practices these 10 virtuous paths, then the second Bhumi becomes even more purified. In what way? Like an autumn moon, they are always pure. It's comparable to the moon in autumn. Indian poets describe it this way, and it's the same in the Tibetan tradition. Autumn moonlight is different from that of spring, summer, or winter. Generally, winter is filled with the stains of dust, so the moon won't appear quite as pure. In spring, it's obscured by various clouds and mists, so it lacks that perfect clarity. In summer, the clouds block it, whether white or black, they cover it up. But by autumn, all that dust, those clouds and the mist are gone. The autumn moon is often called the moon of triple purity. It seems modern science would agree with this as well. In autumn, there's very little water vapor or dust in the air, so the atmosphere is incredibly transparent, and the moon looks exceptionally bright and pure. That's why we use the autumn moon as a metaphor here. Just like that moon, a bodhisattva's discipline is eternally pure. There is never even a single trace of transgression. It's the same in the Chinese tradition. Flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, cool breeze in summer, snow in winter, the moon in autumn. Well, the moon exists in every season, but we use the autumn moon here as a specific metaphor. Just like that autumn moon, a bodhisattva's purity is constant. Moreover, their 3 gates and all their senses are perfectly still and peaceful. Morality fills him with peace and radiance. You see, within the continuum of a bodhisattva on the second Bhumi, there is a unique radiance. This light isn't necessarily a physical flash or a glow, but rather a majestic, commanding aura. What we are talking about here is, well, because of pure discipline. For instance, in the Pratimoksha vows, it is said that if you possess pure discipline, your body naturally radiates light. The Pratimoksha states, a monk with pure discipline has a radiant body. It's often said that discipline is the most sublime of all ornaments. That's one way to put it. So we can see that a bodhisattva on the second Bhumi is like that autumn moon, eternally pure, with their three gates in total stillness. Their majestic conduct is so dignified that it naturally inspires joy in others, just as looking at the moon brings a sense of refreshing coolness to the heart. Encountering a second Bhumi Bodhisattva, someone with such pure discipline, brings immense benefit to our own mental continuum. So we should, how should I put it, we should recognize that even in our world today, great masters who uphold pure discipline are truly the ornaments of this world.
Tēnā chīmdā rāngzhīn tā, tē yīshir nā cīchīm tāg mañi. Tē yīshir tēnā tāgdā xīm chīrā yāng, nī lūr yīwā yāng tāg chārā nīr.
Next, we'll look at explaining the reasoning behind the purity of discipline. Should he, though pure, see in terms of intrinsic nature, his morality will remain impure because of this. Thus, regarding all three gates of discipline, he always remains free from dualistic tendencies. Now, when we talk about a bodhisattva on the second Bhumi, their discipline is exceptionally pure. But why is it so pure? It's because by the time they reach the second Bhumi, on one hand, within their continuum, they have realized the state of the perfection of discipline. On the other hand, their defining characteristic is the complete fulfillment of this perfection. At this stage, if they were to think, this is my pure discipline, and this is I who am pure, or that is their discipline, if that kind of attachment exists, then honestly, that discipline cannot be called pure. Technically, that person would be called a breaker of discipline. Of course, we are speaking here according to the high standards of the second Bhumi. Otherwise, in our ordinary world, a breaker of discipline means someone who has broken the root or branch vows. That's one way to use the term. Then you have those who possess discipline, like the monastics. Bhikshus have 250 vows, bhikshunis have 360, or shramaneras have their 10 precepts. If they keep those, we can say they are pure in discipline. But for a bodhisattva on the second Bhumi, even if they are pure according to those Hinayana standards, if they become attached to it, thinking, I am a pure practitioner, while that person is impure or so-and-so is pure, if they cling to those labels, then such a bhikshu is not supremely pure. As the Great Collection Sutra says, virtuous ones, if a bodhisattva says, I am the one who holds discipline, and that person is the one who breaks it, then such a bodhisattva is said to be deceiving the Tathagata. We also cite a passage from the Sutra of the Great Heap of Jewels here. It mentions that if a bhikshu perceives things as having something to be attained, clinging to me and mine, then the Buddha said, Kashyapa, he has committed the fourth fault. There are many points covered there. The fourth, second, first sutra of the Great Heap of Jewels explains this in great detail. So what does this actually mean? If a bhikshu has taken pure vows, how can he be considered impure? This is speaking from the perspective of the highest Mahayana requirements, because at that highest level, by the second Bhumi, even their discipline is, as we will discuss, in the state of three spheres, the non-duality of actor, action, and object. But if within their continuum they think I am holding pure discipline while they are holding impure discipline, even if I just hold on to this attachment myself, then on a subtle level the mark of attachment is present. And where there is attachment, the highest bodhisattva discipline certainly cannot be fully perfected. Why not? Because true bodhisattva discipline is devoid of inherent nature. Now, if you insist on clinging to the idea, I am the one receiving the vows and these are the vows I've received, like the pratimoksha vows, for example, and in what kind of surroundings did I receive them? I received them while all around me were ordinary, unenlightened beings. That is clinging to the three spheres of the act, and that doesn't count as purest discipline. So when we explain it here, it's primarily about the attachment to me and mine. In other commentaries on entering the middle way, there was one by Jayananda. His commentary says, if a monk clings to the idea of a specific person being pure in discipline, that falls under me and mine. Why is that? For example, I hold pure discipline. The I is the self-clinging. and the discipline I hold is the clinging to what belongs to the self. And what are me and mine? They are the transitory collection, Satkaya Dristi. This Satkaya Dristi must be abandoned at the first Bhumi. If it remains, then the discipline without attachment of the second Bhumi, or the perfection of discipline, certainly cannot be perfected. That's why take Mahasiddha Saraha for instance. After he accepted a Dakini consort, he said, "Before I wasn't a bhikshu, only now am I truly one." Now for ordinary people that's a very difficult statement to accept, but because he had realized the true Mahamudra, the wisdom of innate great bliss, he no longer had any concept of me or mine. In his continuum, the one holding the vows and the essence of the vows had completely merged. At that point he could be called a definitive bhikshu, a definitive upholder of discipline. By the second Bhumi, none of these attachments remain. So in a certain sense we need to understand the deeper meaning being shared here. Next we'll move on to praise for discipline, divided into the actual praise and the reasoning for the Bodhisattva's praise. Two parts. First, why those with lesser capacity also need discipline, and second, why discipline is the foundation for all qualities. These two aspects. The first is further divided into the faults of lacking discipline and the merits of upholding it. Starting with the faults of lacking discipline, there are four faults associated with breaking or being without discipline. The first is the failure to reach a higher realm. If you lack discipline, if you break your vows, you won't even attain the basic merits of a human or God. That's the main point here. Wealth through generosity is found even in the lower realms. This occurs when one has fractured the legs of discipline. Now some of you might be thinking this might not just be about the second Bhumi. Sometimes while discussing the first Bhumi, the text intersperses certain points that aren't strictly about the merits or faults of that specific level. It brings them up for context, it will mention them. In this section most of it focuses on the merits of discipline for a second Bhumi Bodhisattva, but occasionally it also touches on the worldly faults of breaking discipline. Here it says, if you lose the legs of discipline, because generally wisdom is compared to eyes and discipline to legs, if you destroy your discipline, as Nagarjuna said, discipline is like the earth, the foundation for everything stationary or moving. If those legs of discipline are ruined, then such beings, even if they spend their time studying and contemplating, or practicing generosity and doing good deeds, even if they accumulate countless merits, the results they experience won't be very ideal. Even if they are incredibly generous in the world, doing good every single day, discipline is the bedrock. Without it, if the feet are broken, then they can only experience the fruits of that generosity from within the lower realms. They stay in a lower realm. So what does the result of their past generosity, study and practice look like? For example, if I didn't keep my discipline well but I did good deeds, those deeds will still yield results because cause and effect are never failing. I'll definitely feel them, but I might find myself in the next life reborn in a solitary hell, or as part of the Naga clan, or as a hungry ghost with supernatural powers. Some beings in the solitary hells are actually quite wealthy or have certain merits. In those realms some live in luxury by day but suffer terribly at night, or vice versa. It happens. Then there's the Nagas. Naga kings usually have incredible treasures, all sorts of jewels, but their status is that of a lower realm. They are still in the animal realm. The same goes for certain hungry ghosts. There are even treasure-protecting hungry ghosts who guard immense wealth, yet don't even have the right to enjoy it themselves. We might even see the merits of study or making offerings manifesting in the animal kingdom, like an exceptionally majestic elephant, a peacock, or a noble steed. Among their own kind, they are the elite, but they are still trapped in ignorance and cannot reach liberation. So regarding this discipline, the Abhidhammakosha also explains, discipline is primarily for attaining a higher rebirth, while wisdom is what leads to liberation. One absolutely must uphold these precepts. Without discipline, without self-restraint, even if you do many good deeds and accumulate great merit, whether in this life or the next, it won't lead to a truly good outcome. Therefore, attaining perfect discipline is vital, and it's not just about attaining it, you must protect it as if you were guarding your own eyes. This is very important. If we abandon ethical discipline, we won't even achieve rebirth in the higher realms of humans or gods. And if we cannot secure a human or celestial rebirth, then any comfort in the lower realms is ultimately meaningless. That is the first point. Secondly, it is said that wholesome fruits are exhausted once consumed. The karmic rewards one receives are a one-time thing. Once you've experienced them, they are gone. When the very seeds of one's abundance are consumed, no further wealth can ever arise. Consider an example from our world. Imagine a person who has a vast supply of seeds, perhaps barley, wheat, or rice. By planting these seeds, he continually reaps the harvest, and his yield grows more and more over time. There is a natural law at work here. When you have capital that can seed or earn interest, you don't just consume it all at once. You should use it to benefit others and let it keep growing. To use modern terms, it's like investing. However, some foolish people consume all their seeds themselves. They don't reinvest them or allow them to multiply. They simply use it all up. Some people are just like that. Here, seeds refers to the causes that produce future results. The fool consumes all these seeds for their own enjoyment. For instance, if I practice discipline in a previous life, I might have a beautiful appearance in this life, and my wealth might be quite good. Now, if I continue to practice discipline and continue to accumulate merit, I can continue practicing virtue in my next life and enjoy those fruits as well. I have wealth now because of past generosity, beauty because of past discipline, and abundant resources because of prior giving. In this life, I have everything I need. But if I only enjoy these results of the past, without creating new causes, without practicing discipline or generosity, then my situation in the next life will be tragic. If all the seeds of merit are spent on oneself, no further wealth can possibly be produced. There will be no causes or conditions left. The Mahaprajna Paramita Sutra also states, if I do not maintain discipline, I shall fall into the three lower realms. I would not even obtain a human body, let alone ripen sentient beings, purify Buddha fields, or attain all-knowing wisdom. None of that would be possible. The Mahaprajna Paramita Sutra makes this clear. If we fail to maintain discipline, we may end up as hell beings, hungry ghosts or animals, unable to even attain a human rebirth. Under those conditions, rebirth in a pure land or attaining enlightenment becomes impossible, mere empty words. Now that we have this human body, as we will discuss further, we must exert ourselves. Next, we discuss the fault of the difficulty of escaping the lower realms. If, when free and living with favorable conditions, we do not retain this status we enjoy, we will fall into the abyss and be at the mercy of others. What could enable us to rise up again from such a state? This verse is extremely important. It means that right now, when we are free and independent, we are living in favorable circumstances, with living spiritual teachers, and the Dharma still flourishing. For one, we currently have our own freedom. If we choose to learn the Dharma and practice, no one is controlling or interfering with us. No one is forcing you. This is the current state. And then there is our environment. The place we are in is also a favorable one. There are no external disturbances. In realms like hell or as a hungry ghost, practice is impossible. Just as described in the words of my perfect teacher, when discussing the 8 states without freedom, it's simply impossible. If one were a celestial being intoxicated by daily pleasures, that would also make practice impossible. But right now in this human realm, we have favorable conditions to develop renunciation and bodhicitta. Thus we dwell in favorable conditions. If one fails to restrain oneself, suppose you don't seize this opportunity, don't rely properly on a spiritual teacher, and don't practice diligently. If you don't restrain yourself with mindfulness and awareness, the end will surely be a fall into the deep abyss. I believe in the auto-commentary or a similar text. It says, it's like a warrior who has been bound with ropes and thrown into a canyon. He has no way to pull himself out. It's very pitiful. By the same token, I am previously there was a man named Saddam. In the end, with a noose around his neck, he was executed in front of the whole world. His execution was intended by America for the whole world to see. He was once the formal president of a nation, but later sentenced to death. At that point, no one could save him. In fact, for us in this human world, When we have all kinds of abilities at our disposal, if we don't practice diligently, don't strive for such opportunities, and don't restrain ourselves through mindfulness, then in the end everything will be controlled by others, being turned by other forces. It's like falling into the evil realms. At that time, how will one ever get out? At that point, what kind of power could you rely on to be saved from the three evil realms or from samsara? No one would be able to save you. So this verse, the one we are discussing now, was something many great masters of the Kadampa tradition, whether in their own practice or when teaching the Dharma, would recite first at the beginning, just as we now recite the supreme, profound and wondrous Dharma, to rely on the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to help us understand the meaning of the sutras and treatises. That's what we do, right? But the great masters of the past, before teaching or practicing on their own, they would recite this once, to remind everyone, remind them of what? If you don't make careful, diligent effort while you are free and independent and possess favorable conditions, if you don't take charge of yourself and don't practice well, then once you fall into the abyss, no one can save you. This is very terrifying. It's just like in the secular world, some children don't listen to their parents, their teachers, or virtuous people. They live a life of total freedom and dissipation, but once they end up behind bars, regret is useless. It's exactly like that. So the Kadampa tradition placed great emphasis on this, and His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok, when he taught the entering the middle way in the past, he taught the auto-commentary as well as the root verses. When he taught, his requirement was for those who could memorize the entering the middle way. It would be best to do so. If you can't memorize the whole text, you must at least memorize this verse. His Holiness said this at the time. So for us this time, perhaps many practitioners from the academy used to memorize the entering the middle way. Every year there were many who took the memorization exams, but now many people might not have that opportunity. Therefore, this time everyone should also memorize this verse well. Because each of us must think to ourselves, when it comes to real practice, you have to look at yourself. In one of the Karmapa's works called The 80 Instructions, it quotes from Potowa's Talking to Oneself. I once thought about translating this. It's a teaching where Potowa reminds himself, an instruction in the form of talking to himself. In his Talking to Oneself teachings, he exhorts himself to practice diligently, saying a human life and its opportunities are so hard to find. At one point in there, he says we should practice well right now. If I don't practice well in the next life, horns will grow on my head and hooves on my feet, like an ox with horns above and hooves below. If I turn into that, I won't even be able to hear the name of the three jewels. Sometimes while talking to himself, he would even faint. This was extremely intense in their hearts. Unlike us, who might have heard it 100 times but still feel nothing at all. The speaker might think of it as just a routine, thinking they're done once the words are out. Very dry language. Just finishing the verbal description is enough. The listeners basically feel that having finished listening is good enough. Many don't even want to listen. But if you truly understand the Dharma deeply, the verse we discussed today is something I still want you to memorize. Use this verse to remind yourself at any time. His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok on many occasions quoted this verse frequently, whether teaching lay people or teaching monastics. Now, while all favorable conditions are present, everyone must truly cherish this opportunity and practice diligently. Otherwise, if we fall into the three evil realms in the future, or if we lack the opportunity to practice, it will be extremely tragic and so on. So I think by relying on this method, everyone has the chance. Staying in your own home to listen to or study the Dharma is a rare opportunity. If even this is gone in the future, it will be very miserable. So everyone should be fully prepared right now. No matter where you go, you must still study diligently. Therefore, I hope those listening to the class this time can memorize it for themselves. And just like the Kadampa tradition, when communicating with others, reciting it once beforehand is fine too. Or while practicing on your own, use this sentence to remind and urge yourself to practice well. Otherwise, if one falls down later and becomes a yak or a hungry ghost or a dog, at that point, if one wants to change that destiny immediately, no one would be able to. So while you are free and independent, with the Dharma present and a spiritual teacher to guide you, you should consider yourself very fortunate. We should practice as much as you can. Of course, this practice, sometimes we say practice, 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 but actually right now we are doing things that are beneficial for sentient beings. It doesn't necessarily mean you must close your eyes. If you insist on closing your eyes, sometimes the practice might not even arise. So while we are living in this world, do not waste your human life. Do something meaningful. This is also called practice. This is called Zen in motion. One should do beneficial things and also recite sutras and pray well. This is very important. All right, we will stop here today.
Bandara Badna Sodargye Bandara Badna Sodargye Bandara Badna Sodargye